Now, in this particular part of the presentation, we're going to be talking about the edges, how that edges can be used to suit the neighborhood requirements, right? And also, if I mean, in many circumstances, in many development on the edges, industrial development offices are positioned, and in the middle, in the center, you can find residential areas. Likewise, between the residential and the industrial zone, you need to have a proper a transition that's going to act as a buffer between those two different zones. All right. Now, just for example, in a residential area, people would like to have peace of mind, especially at night. They would like to have a good night's sleep. They don't want to be disturbed. Whereas in an industrial zone, it is noise 24/7. So to lessen the impact of noise on those residents, it is better to have a transition zone, a well-planned, designed transition zone that's going to sort of absorb the noise, for example. Now, noise is just an example, but there are many other examples also, right? And this particular presentation talks about the edges, development, and also about the transition zone, how we can make the best out of it. Requirements of sustainable development are out-of-town development. Often these are monofunctional in nature, and the example of such out-of-town development would be industrial warehouses, industrial buildings, offices, retail parks are a few examples. Now, these elements are brought back into urban centers to become part of the urban mix. This is the intent of many urban planners, and they try to harmonize those uh, monofunctional development within the region they are developing. This has fundamental implication in terms of forms, in terms of density. Now, since we're talking about industrial uh, buildings, offices, this would entail a huge number of parkings to be provided to both the workers as well as to the visitors. Now, particularly how to accommodate big boxes. Now, these are referred to as big boxes because when we look at those buildings, they are warehouses. Warehouses would, let's say, if we want to give some dimensions to that, would be around 30 meters wide by 80 meters long. These are minimum small warehouses, but we can have bigger warehouses. And when we see them from top view, they look like big boxes on the regional map, right? So we have to sort of have these big boxes absorbed within the mixed development that is being proposed. Now, still talking about big boxes, it is important to establish that the provision of such warehousing facilities, retail, office facilities must be appropriate to the needs of the locality and must not impose socioeconomic cost on the community in terms of the inflow outflow of traffic generated from these industries. There shouldn't be any visual impairment, all right, and any undermining established centers. Now, a preferred approach would be to absorb big boxes into the transition area on the edge of the retail core. So you have the edge being able to absorb those big boxes. Now, in basically, in essence, what is the intent is to get the minimum flow of traffic towards these industries restricted on the edge of the region being developed. So whatever be, if it is a highly trafficable area, it is going to be on the edge of the neighborhood. It's not going to impact negatively on the traffic inflow within that particular region or neighborhood. The presence of large development blocks in these locations, in these regions, can provide sufficient land to wrap the main perimeter of the box with a skin of smaller buildings. Now, concealing its bulk and creating active frontages for aesthetic reason, definitely. Now, sitting within the walkable catchment from a public transport node will also encourage more sustainable customer transport patterns. This will boost these type of transport choices. Second, select cul-de-sac locations where at least one site edge requires no frontage. Now, for example, would be if we have as adjacent to these retail facilities a railway line. This would help. This would be of interest, and it's going to impact positively on the overall comfort level of the region, of the neighborhood. So this lessens the amount of exposed blank walls and servicing, right? So basically, the intent here is to absorb the big boxes into the mix. This is how urban planners try to integrate those ISO plain ugly buildings into the existing neighborhood. Large stores and other large big box units that are often standalone items with exposed large dead frontages create particular problems for active and attractive streets, right? So these facades are not very interesting, are not very attractive. Now, however, such building types can be modified to become to become compatible with fine-grained urban settings. How? By mixing horizontal and as well as vertically with other uses. Now, this may involve the following: wrapping the perimeter on the street faces with smaller unit. An example would be Sainsbury's supermarket, Clapham High Street. You can search that on the net. Building other uses on the airspace above the box, right? Example, Tesco's supermarkets, Sheffield and Earl's Court. Incorporating a well-designed upper facade for rooftop parking, such as Waitrose, formerly Safeways supermarket in Fulham. Externalizing more active uses, such as creation of cafes and boutiques, and increasing their transparency to the street, would sort of wrap and cap the big boxes that pose problems to urban planners, urban designers, as well as architects. Now, monofunctional commercial developments, as we've been talking in the previous slides, include industrial, business, retail, leisure, office, or even science lab parks, are clusters of low-density facilities that have in recent years formed driving estates cut off from their surroundings. So these driving estates have been cut off from their surroundings. They remain one of the most problematic challenges for urban designers uh, concerned with creating integrated mixed developments. So this becomes a sort of a bone to overcome by these professional urban designers. Clustering low-density facilities in marginal locations is only justifiable when noise or pollution emission prevent closer integration with residential areas and low-grade urban land, right, can be utilized. Now, basically, where you have sound problem, you want the industry to work away from the residents, so as they are not the nuisance to the active part of the community. This is where you're going to shift. You're going to shift it to shift these monofunctional industries development far away from civilization in a certain sense. Now, the best place to do that is to take them to these dead edges. I mean, on the limit of the development, where you've got those boundaries, you bring those, you shift those commercial development there. All right. In a certain way, in doing so, you're going to be dead edges to life. Now, how are we going to bring dead edges to life? Well, the preferred approach is to locate such industries, such employment and commercial uses uh, in such a way that they link to nearby centers with access to public transportation. So these are accessible off main routes and are also in within walking distances to most of the housing units within that region as far as possible. Now, if big boxes or sheds are unavoidable, then we have to ensure they are accommodated within a perimeter block structure with some kind of public frontage as well as enhance landscaping. Allow for future retrofitting and densification, especially of the often excessive parking areas. Right? So these are things that can be uh, undertaken. Now, we've been talking about the center and the edge of the development, but there should be some kind of transition zone between the center and the edge. So this is essential. So we need to foster a rich mix in the transition, right? So we have a center, and as we move to the edge, we are moving it, let's say, a dead zone. So there should be a proper transition between the center and the edge of the neighborhood. So the transition zone between center and edge is fertile land for mixing to occur and can vary enormously in character. So you can shape that. These are the hodgepodge areas that bridge the commercial core and the residential region. So there is some kind of overlapping here that urban planners, urban designers can uh, sort of looked at creative ways of making those transitions. It is within these zones that the most dynamic mix can be planned, right? So how do we do that? So we plan them with shops, workspaces, storage yards, as well as housing existing side by side. Now, land values enable some of these lower density uses to thrive and provide the most scope for encouraging live work, specialty retailing, artists and cultural quarters, for example. In large schemes, transition zones can be used to buffer homes and other noise-sensitive uses from activity sources. Now, definitely, we've got a residential zone where people, after a hard day's work, would like to rest and have a good night's sleep. And on the other extremities, you've got an industrial zone that might be working on a 24/7 basis. So continuous noise is one of the outputs. So you don't want these noise to disturb, to affect the lives of those residents. So by putting those industrial estates, those industrial zones far away from the residential zone, you need to provide like a barrier, a buffer between uh, the residential and the industrial zone. So the transition zone acts as a buffer. However, nighttime uses such as pubs, clubs, and restaurants can also work well here. If positioned away from predominantly residential areas, they can also feed off one another when they are clustered. Schools are often best located in the transition zone between the higher density residential areas and local centers, where they are as close as possible to the majority of children and where they can be introduced without cutting off pedestrian access to the center of the community or development.